Okay, good evening, everyone, and welcome to another edition of, well, I was going to say Blue Sunday, but it's actually Blue Monday. On In the Blue Corner channel, Vince Locissano here with you. I was going to say fresh back from Perth, but I don't think I'm that fresh. But I'm certainly back from Perth, WA, and, of course, joined by Stephen Khatib. I gather you stayed back in Melbourne, Steve, but I was fortunate enough to spend a few days over there in sunny WA, and it all culminated in a fantastic 10-goal plus victory for Carlton yesterday. And it wasn't looking like that about halfway through the third quarter, but it ended up being a comprehensive win after that struggle, if you like, that tug of war for ascendancy in the third quarter eventually ended with us kicking the last goal or so of the third quarter, and I think that might have broken their hearts, and they had nothing left after that. Did you see the game?
Yeah, I did, and really disappointing from them. I mean, I suppose it was a tale of almost two halves within a game. Two scoreless quarters by West Coast, the first and the last.
Yeah,
and then two reasonably good quarters of football by them as well in the second and the third.
They certainly hit back at us in the second, that's for sure.
Absolutely. And, you know,
chalk and cheese compared to their first quarter.
Absolutely. And so they should have. They're always going to do that, but they would have been really disappointed. It was real junk time, Harlem Globetrotters type football in that last quarter, wasn't it? Where it was just Carlton were doing as they pleased. Targets in the 50 were just open.
Pardon me while I'm mucking around with some equipment.
That's all right. Centre bounce clearances were just, it was a look. Carlton were great in that last quarter. Don't get me wrong, but there wasn't any pressure applied, was there? So it did sort of flatter Carlton in the end, didn't it? The result.
Maybe, but look, all you can do is make the most of the situation, and I think we did. In the end, we kicked right away and won by 10-plus goals. It never looked like being a game. Well, it looked like being that way in the first quarter. It looked like we could have won the game by 100 points after the first quarter. But after they hit back at us in the second, and then there was that real struggle for ascendancy in the third quarter, and then we started to just get our noses in front again. It didn't look like being a 10-goal win, but it ended up being that way. And I think that's a sign of a good side that can put the opposition to the sword when they're on the ropes.
Yeah, agree. No, absolutely. Carlton did what they had to do and found a way to, get the momentum back in that third quarter, and then went on with it.
Yes, the score seemed to be stuck on 53 to 63 for quite a while there in that third quarter, and I was there with Rocco from the jumper punch, and I was saying to him, "Hey, I tell you what, whoever gets the next one it's going to be a telling goal, because if they get it, they're within a goal of us. That could really give them some inspiration. If we get it, it might just break their hearts." And as it turns out, they never scored again. After they got to 53-63, they did not score again. And, in fact, for the entire game, West Coast had two quarters where they did not score. Now, you're not going to win too many games of football where you don't score in 2 out of the 4 quarters. And, their first quarter was pretty lackluster, allowing us to get 5 goals for and not even troubling the scoreboard themselves. And then in the last quarter, you could just tell that they'd run out of gas. And, again, our defence held up beautifully and prevented them from scoring at all, while our attack piled on 7 goals.
So we could dissect this game, pretty in detail. But in reality, at high level, what do you think this means for Carlton?
The result itself probably means not a lot in terms of whether we're, you can only beat your opposition. You're not going to play finals type teams every week. In the end, you look at the scoreboard and say, yep, that's probably what you'd expect, about a 10-goal win against the side that's struggled to win more than 2 games for the season so far out of what 15 or 16 games. But I think it tells us that we still have some deficiencies. To allow a team like that to come back from 34-0 and then be back to within 10 points at half time shows that we have got some areas to work on, that if we're up against quality opposition, they will make us pay for something like that.
Do you think there are little signs there? And let's look at Port Adelaide. Let's look at Hawthorn games. Let's look at a few other games off the top of my head. I can't, put them all together, but there's been quite a few where we've either burst out of the blocks, 6-7 goal leads.
Yeah.
You thought how far? What were the margins judged? And then there's been, I know football's momentum, and you can't dominate for that long, but not so much continuing to kick a further 7 goals, but simply holding that lead wasn't there, and it's been something that's been an issue across all the games, or quite a few of them anyway. I shouldn't say all of them, but quite a few of them. Would you agree with that? And that second quarter sort of still showed as much as we were flying that we still had some issues.
Look, after the first quarter, the feeling around me and talking to all the people and supporters around me was, how far are we going to win this by? Could we win this by 100, 120 points? By half time, it was like, oh my God, what have we done? We've let them back in again. Why does this keep happening? Just when we think we're dominating and we should be able to really make it count, big percentage boosting win, all of a sudden the opposition's kicked 7 goals and made us look second rate. So we have to learn from these experiences. You'll get away with it against teams like West Coast and North Melbourne, etc., because they're right down the bottom of the ladder. But you won't get away with it with some of the really top teams. And this weekend against Geelong will be a massive test for our team. It's probably the biggest one that we'll have had so far in the season, because I don't really believe, other than playing Fremantle twice, where we've lost the first one, then won the second one, we haven't really been tested against top 4 opposition. And, or that might have been the only test. So this will be, if you like, the second team that we'll be tested against that's a true top 4/top 6 team.
It's more of a test than Fremantle, I think, because you're playing them at the MCG.
Neutral territory.
Yeah, absolutely. Post up at Docklands. Look, definitely.
We're playing at the MCG, yeah. And Saturday night, big crowd, should be the match of the round, I think. So look, yes, it's disturbing that we've continued to let teams come back at us, but what we have been able to do, and what we did in that third quarter, is we held them off. They were trying to keep coming. They were trying to make, a continuation of that second quarter happen in the third quarter, where they kept coming at us. Now, the problem for West Coast was that they just couldn't finish off their work, and they just couldn't penetrate that last line of defence in Carlton's back line.
But Vince, we should have held them off, though.
I know, but we did. But the point is that we never let them get any closer than 1.5 goals to our score. So they were desperate to try and match it with us and get level, and then obviously try and take the lead. But we never let them get close enough to do that.
Yeah.
So we resisted the pressure in the third quarter.
Yeah.
There was a real tug of war, stalemate situation. It was like a real arm wrestle. And eventually, Charlie Curnow got a goal from the boundary line, which really, you could see, sunk their hearts a bit. And that goal put us 17 points in front at three-quarter time. And I just thought at that point, I know it's only 17 points, but I think they're spent. And you could just tell in the last quarter, they just were running on empty. And we piled on 7 goals, 4 to nothing. So when you put 5 goals, 4 to nothing in the first, 7 goals, 4 to nothing in the last, what's that? 12-8, 80 points to nothing in 2 quarters. And you win by 63. Well, so they've done well to probably, win the 2 middle quarters, but we did enough in those first and last quarters to dominate. So, look, I think it was good from the game's point of view. It made it interesting, the fact that West Coast came back at us, and then there was that real struggle in the third before we pulled away. So from a viewing point of view, I didn't mind that because it made it a real contest and started to throw a few challenges at some of our players and coaches from that point of view. West Coast, to me, are clearly a side that are hanging on the back of their ageing stars like, I've got to give Josh Kennedy a big mention. Of course, he's a former Carlton player. He kicked his 700th West Coast goal yesterday and was the only one in the forward line that looked half dangerous. He's clearly on ageing legs, and I wouldn't be surprised if he announced his retirement before the end of the season.
Yeah, I believe he will.
He's been a fantastic player for them, and I guess it begs the question, 7 years after Chris Judd has retired, who won the battle of that trade? Josh Kennedy's got a premiership medal around his neck and a Coleman medal or 2. I'm not sure how many Colemans he's won. He's definitely won 1. So, Carlton, yes, Judd came across. We needed the leadership, but what does it all count for in the end? He's not there anymore, and all the players he's played with aren't there anymore. Probably the only one who's still hanging around a bit is Eddie Curnow, and he's not even playing in the seniors. So,
yeah, Vissy got good marketing out of Judd, though.
Yes, of course, as a green ambassador and, recycling ambassador and what have you. Yeah, because he's right into all those sorts of issues, isn't he, Juddy?
Yeah, so from a board perspective and a business perspective, we did pretty well.
So, yeah, I don't know. It's a debatable argument.
Look,
who won the trade? I know a lot of Carlton people say if you had the chance to do it again, you'd still do it again. I don't know. I'll tell you what, I reckon Josh Kennedy over 15 years at West Coast has provided incredible service, and to kick 700 career goals, he's up there with the Stephen Kernahans of the world.
If he stayed in that environment, and I don't know how our audience is demographic, Vince. I don't know if it's the people of you and I. We've probably got appeal to a cross section.
We'd like to think we appeal to the thinking Carlton supporters' mind. Yeah.
It's a cross section of the community of different ages. I know that period. Let's go back to 18 years ago. It seems like only yesterday, really.
18 years. So you're talking 2004?
Yeah. So let's talk about. They were the days just after we had the main logo on the jumper. I don't know if we still did or not. Right? So just if you look at, if you go by sponsors' logos on the jumper to what era you're playing in, that's sort of depending, right? That was the era we had heavily sanctioned drafts. We had I think we just had that draft where Kennedy was an early pick, and Walker was there as well around that time. Andrew Walker as well.
Walker was picked up at number 2 in the 2003 draft.
There you go, right? So you had those players essentially thrown to the wolves very early in their career, and let's.
So if Josh Kennedy stayed at Carlton,
you know where I'm going, right?
Would we have developed him into the footballer he is today, and would he have achieved at Carlton what he's achieved at West Coast over the last 15 years if that trade had never been done?
You'd never say
we'll never know the answer to the question.
No, of course you won't.
But you can only answer that in anticipation of what would have happened with him had he stayed.
So we had that era was when Pagan got sacked just after. I think was it that year? I think the Brisbane.
Yeah, no, he left for West Coast at the end of 2007. So Pagan had already been sacked, and Ratton had taken over for 6 games and ensured that we finished in a position where we got 2 draft picks to do the trade in the first place.
Yeah, that's right. So let's look at it. Right, it was a pretty ordinary place to be.
My word, it was.
Yeah, like it was.
And we were copping shellackings.
We'd go to the footy every week and
Yeah.
think, could we get within 5 goals of this mob?
Yeah.
And then when you played a bottom team and you thought, oh, here's a chance today.
Still go home.
And you'd still get beat. And you think, oh, we can't even beat, in those days it was St Kilda or maybe it was Bulldogs or North at that time. It was sort of second, third, bottom.
I can't even remember. It was us that was on the bottom all the time.
We were on the very bottom, but it was North and anyway. You get what I'm saying.
Well, Melbourne
right?
at the end of 2007 was the team that we were competing with for the Matthew Cruiser draft pick, if you remember.
That's right. Yeah. And even Melbourne that teams like Melbourne second bottom.
Well, they were up and down. They were sort of in the 8 one year and then down the bottom the next, and backwards and forwards in that respect. Yeah. Yeah.
So look.
So getting back to Josh Kennedy.
Yeah, forget it. You couldn't. No way he would have ever been that good. Sorry, it's sad to say that, but if you put it in another
I tend to agree with you.
If you put it in another era, a different era, yes, right?
Well, he went over to West Coast at a time when they'd won a premiership, 2 years earlier, or 1 year earlier, in fact, at the end of 2006. So it was a successful club with a successful culture. John Worsfold was the coach there for a number of years beyond that. So, once Worsfold left, then came Adam Simpson. He's been there for the last, at least 7 or 8 years, hasn't he?
Yeah.
If not longer. So they've had stability and they've had players develop during that time. And 2018, that was where it all culminated into a premiership. And obviously Kennedy and Darling were the 2 pillars up forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they still are today, but they have to now start finding alternatives to Kennedy. And Darling's still got a few years because he's a lot younger than Kennedy, but certainly Josh is going to be sadly missed once he's gone.
But they got their flag. Question here from...
we've got a question now. Just before we go to this question, can I just add, seeing we've been going for 17 minutes already, if anyone out there who's watching would like to be part of the show and you'd like to ask a question or give us your opinion or your comments, do what Brandon Bevelak was just done and send it to us via our Facebook page, In the Blue Corner. Or if you're not on Facebook, you can go to our YouTube page of the same name, In the Blue Corner, and you'll see us premiering live right now. So we look forward to your participation. Now, what's Brandon got to ask?
If you had to redo the trade, what would you have given West Coast to keep Kennedy? Well, I believe Walker was offered up at that time.
I think that question, with respect, Brandon, it's not worded correctly. We wanted Judd. So it wasn't a trade that we did to keep Kennedy. They were the ones that insisted on Kennedy. And they're the ones that said, if you want Judd, we want Kennedy, not negotiable, that's it. And then they ended up doing trades on draft picks where I think we had to give them pick 3 and we gave them pick 20 from memory.
Yes.
So our first 2 draft picks of that draft in return for Chris Judd, and then I think we got pick 47 or something like that as well.
Yeah.
So
we tried to give him Walker instead, I believe, at that time. Or there were some other options tabled up.
Well, there were we threw up other alternatives because we knew that Kennedy was a key position forward who had some real talent and some real potential, but he was very much a young teenager. I think we got him at 17 and he ended up being 18 and 19 while we had him. He might have just turned 20 when we traded him. In fact, I think that's true. So, we hadn't seen any of his best years yet. We'd only seen had a taste of how good he could be.
And he was from West Coast.
He was from Geraldton. So, he was a West Coast boy. And that's why they wanted him as well, because they wanted a player that wasn't going to say, I'm homesick, I want to go back to Queensland or New South Wales or Victoria.
But at the time, though, he and Murphy and all of those young players actually had a bond.
I can tell you from experience, because unbeknownst to most, I was actually helping Josh Kennedy at the time find a home. And he rang me and said, look, sorry I've wasted your time, but I'm about to get traded to West Coast in return for Judd, and I'm not going to stand in their way, because if I do, everyone's going to hate me forever at Carlton, because everyone wants Judd to come over here. So he said I'm going to be going back to Western Australia. So it was he had every intention of staying, and he didn't want to go. He didn't seek the trade. So it's not like Bryce Gibbs. It's not like Bryce Gibbs, who was asking to go to Adelaide. Josh Kennedy did not want to leave Carlton.
I bet you had a property too lined up for him that was just now. Had he have taken that, it would have just gone up in value.
Well, if he had bought something already, he probably would have said, "Well, look, resell it for me, or maybe I'll just keep it as an investment or something." So, look, he's a great young guy, Josh, and I've caught up with him a few times since then, and he's now got a beautiful wife and family. And look, he's about to turn 35 next month. He is at the end, in my opinion. You can just tell his body, he's pushing himself, but and he's still, good enough to be kicking a couple of goals a game, but his years of kicking 7 and 8 are probably over.
Yeah.
Brandon says, we keep pick 1, and I remember Waite was offered up also. Yeah, look, we offered up all sorts of different options, but in the end, the only player that they were really interested in doing a trade for was Kennedy, in order to get Judd. Fabio, we were on our knees as a club. That's true. Desperate for a leader. That's true. It's not as simplistic as saying Judd for Kennedy. No, I accept that. But what we're doing, Fabio, is assessing at the end of it all, when you assess, who won and who lost, would you rather have had Judd for... what do we have him for? 8 years?
13 he did his knee, wasn't it?
He had 6 years at West Coast, and he spent 8 years, actually 7.5, because he retired halfway through 2015. So 7.5 years at Carlton, of which probably 6 of those were he was in very good form. The last year and a half, I think he tapered off a bit, and he certainly was getting injuries more consistently, and it was that knee injury against Adelaide at the MCG that finally put the nail in the coffin. But I don't know. What have we got to show for it? We haven't got a premiership.
Remember the
only person that's got anything to show for it is Chris Judd, because he's got a Brownlow medal around his neck from 2010. But in a tangible sense, we've got nothing to show for it. Now, yes, he might have, and I'm sure he did, display some leadership qualities, set some higher standards with the players when it came to what they were eating, how they were training, etc., etc. And I've heard those stories, and I have no doubt that he had a very positive influence on the playing group in that sense. And that's great, but 98% of those players are not playing in the team anymore. I think the only ones might be Eddie Curnow, Patrick Cripps, and Sam Doherty, and I can't think of any others in the current list of players that played with Judd back in 2014, 2015.
Remember when he first came, the summer of that, just prior to his first game against Richmond, and the talk was, Judd in Carlton is going to essentially make 4 or 5 wins more automatically just by
being in the team.
Yeah. The talk and the hype and the memberships that were sold on the back of it too.
Of course.
The number 5s and everything. It was, it's not simple, but commercially, what he
represented the club. Was what, in my view, what he represented was the typical Carlton messiah, and that's what Carlton is guilty of. And I say guilty because they should feel guilty about making one person. Basically the one we're going to hang our hats on to make everything change. Now, whether it's a president, whether it's a CEO, whether it's a player, whether it's a coach, as a club, we have been so guilty over many, many years now of recruiting someone who's going to fix it all. And, in this case, as a player, Judd was seen as the messiah. I mean, did you remember that shot of Chris Judd's head on Jesus Christ's body, and he's holding, his hand up like that, the way Jesus Christ, and they put Chris Judd's head on him. And they were saying things like, no, it's not JC, it's CJ, and all that sort of thing. I mean, crazy stuff. Painting him as the Messiah. So, yes, he was a great player. Yes, he was capable. But one person can only do so much, and time will tell, and it always does. And it ended up proving itself that we never won a premiership. We didn't even make a grand final with Chris Judd.
We did though. I agree with you on the Messiah stuff. You're spot on, and that supporters buy into that too. And I think we're hopefully getting over that, but I probably aren't. But
really?
We are. I like to hope we are, but I don't think we are. That'll still be.
We love a Messiah, us Carlton supporters.
Yeah,
Our Carlton supporting group have been conditioned to make someone a Messiah.
Yeah,
they have been brainwashed over the years into making people a Messiah. Yeah. So thanks, Brad. CJ is Jason. That's exactly what I'm talking about. So look, Josh Kennedy wasn't seen as a Messiah at West Coast. He just fitted into the team, did his thing. He was properly developed as a full forward and centre-half forward and played his role. And he's got a premiership medallion around his neck and a Coleman medal as well to show for it. So, I'm one of these people that assesses things in black and white in a very sort of cold way. And I just say, well, West Coast premiership, tick. Coleman medalist, tick. Carlton, we got a Brownlow medalist. But nothing from a team point of view.
Agreed. Just as a club, though, financially, we were absolutely insolvent. Right. Yep. Absolutely insolvent.
Yes, now, we were from that point of view at the time.
Members had dropped off. Like we were, it was hard. It was hard enough for the best of us to go.
But if you remember, Steve, hang on.
Every week, you know how hard it was? Do you know?
I know.
You used to go at 12 o'clock every week.
But what you got to remember is that at the start of 2007, so we're talking about, 9 or 10 months before Chris Judd decided to make it official that he was coming to Carlton, we had an election and the board was determined from 15 candidates, 12 of them were elected. The president at the time, the incumbent president, Graham Smorgan, was booted off the board.
Yep. That's right.
Lorraine Diggins.
The late Lorraine Diggins, yep.
The late Lorraine Diggins. She didn't succeed in staying on the board. And Ross Fiore, who was trying to get on the board, didn't get enough votes to get on. Everyone else got on, including Stephen Kernahan, Adrian Gleeson.
I think it was.
There were other people there, but what I'm saying is Stephen Moulton and those types. What I'm saying is that amongst the 12 that were left who had been elected onto the board, not one of them wanted to be president. Not one. So what did they do? They went and knocked on Richard Pratt's door and changed the rules to make it 13 now is possible on the board. And he immediately got onto the board, was invited on and immediately made president. So by January of 2007, Richard Pratt, all of a sudden, remember the photos of him at the front of Princes Park? And it was like the lights had been switched on again.
We could afford to paint
was still
the social club. We could afford to paint the social club.
Yeah.
It hadn't had a lick of paint that decade, that era.
I know. Tell me about it.
Social club, and it was like it had changed. It had a nice blue.
All of a sudden, everything had been painted. Yeah. Well, the thing is that Richard Pratt did make a difference, and even if it was just purely the way everyone felt, it was like, oh God, he's going to save us. But again, he was seen as the saviour, and it was like, oh, don't worry about the money. The money will be all right. We're not going to go broke, and all this sort of thing. Now, nothing comes for nothing. And Richard Pratt's no deal. He doesn't just give money for nothing either. But, or was no deal. So, again, the Messiahs arrived, but we still had issues. We still had Pagan there as a coach. So things had to change. He ended up getting rid of Michael Maloof as the CEO and installing Greg Swan when they knew that they couldn't get the other one. Brian Cook, who was at Geelong.
Yep.
Who's now Carlton CEO. So they went for Greg Swan instead. They got him across. By round 16 of 2007, Pagan's papers were stamped. He was sacked unceremoniously, and Ratton installed as the interim coach. So 2007 still finished up being a very unsuccessful year. And we ended up finishing, I think, second last, but with the number 1 pick and the number 3 pick. Thanks to that infamous game against Melbourne at the MCG on Father's Day at twilight or whatever it was.
With the Seagulls.
Oh, my goodness. It was the worst game of football I've ever seen in my life. So, where are we going with this? We're going off on a tangent. But the point is...
We're talking about what
we're talking about...
if Kennedy was in that era.
Yeah. Now, if Kennedy left then, that's when Kennedy left. Straight after that particular game was played and Carlton got pick 1 and pick 3, that's when they had the negotiating tools to do a trade for Chris Judd. Now, no doubt there were conversations going on for weeks and months before that. Judd had made it clear to West Coast that he wanted to leave and go back to Melbourne. He came, remember when it was all, disclosed that he's gone and visited Essendon, and then he went to Collingwood, and then he came to Carlton, and then he went to Melbourne.
Tour around the city.
Yeah, he's on his tour of all the Victorian clubs, the big ones.
That was the first. The player touring the facilities and shopping the clubs around. Remember in the old days, it was never like that at all.
No,
that was the first of many player-led shopping trips rather than club-led shopping trips.
Yeah, that was like, tell me why I should select you as my club. Tell me why I should come to your club instead of one of these other clubs. Jimmy Raptus, if the Judd deal never happened, Favola would have finished up at the club and not gone north. Well, that's probably a good chance of being true, Jimmy. Because let's face it, he only had troubles when he went up to the Brown. Look, who knows? But I don't think Favola and Judd in the end end up being the best of mates after the way Brendan carried on.
I think Judd put a few goals lace out to Fev, though, right? Let's be honest.
Oh, no doubt. So did a few others.
Service. Yeah, true. That's right.
Yeah, so did a few others. But so look, we can all talk about the what ifs. There's probably nothing to be gained out of all that. But what we're highlighting here is the consistent Messiah mentality, the whole saviour thing. We've got to stop being like that. What I can see happening now, though, is that Carlton is starting to play far more as a team. You haven't got the big standout Messiah necessarily on the ground. I think a few people are putting the Messiah tag on Michael Voss at the moment, but I think it's a bit early to be sort of saying he's achieved anything too much. Oh, there you go. Thanks, Brad. Oh, dear. They'll probably extend that to Brian Cook being the Messiah as a CEO and Luke Sayers being the Messiah as a president, I suppose.
No, but let's be honest, though. It's not like most coaches that go to a club or CEOs, the club's in absolute disarray, generally speaking, and bottomed out to some degree. Yeah. Now, Carlton were, 11th last year? But if you look at the list they
8
had,
wins.
Underachievement was really what it was. It wasn't,
of course,
but it was a cultural, systemic failure.
Yeah, I guarantee you that if Michael Voss had come in under last year's board, under last year's administration, and with last year's playing list, he probably wouldn't have done any. Well, he probably wouldn't have done that much better than David Teague, in my view.
Yeah,
that's my personal opinion.
I don't think he and
maybe a little, but not much.
Kane Little and him would have had the same issues that Teague had with Little, for example. I don't see any of that changing. I think that the common denominator here, to be honest, is Brian Cook's cleared the decks a little bit and allowed people to do what they do best.
Yeah, but you've also, seen. Last year we didn't even have a football director because Chris Judd had basically checked out and they hadn't replaced him with anybody. This year we have Greg Williams there, obviously doing a good job. So, there's a whole heap of things that make it different this year to last year.
Yeah.
It's not just the change of coach. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. No, there's a lot of things. And I think if you looked at the underachievement, that would be, if you're thinking as a real estate agent, Vince, I'm just using that now because you talked about the homes before. There's certainly a quick upside in the property value you're always going to see that spike because
it's like a sugar hit, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a sugar hit.
Because we weren't that bad.
No.
We shouldn't have been.
No.
Yeah.
Yes, and I'm sure that a lot of things affected our playing list performance last year. If everything was running as it should be off the field, and from a cultural aspect, it had been a healthy culture, I see no reason why we couldn't have won enough games even last year to make the finals.
Correct, which would have been probably where we should have been.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why I think there were scapegoats made at the end of last year, because it was felt that we should have been good enough to make finals, and we didn't. And the ones that copped it in the neck are the ones that had to pay the price for it.
That's the list demographic, though, too. And we spoke off air about, you talk about that draft age where you had the 15 draft and the subsequent drafts from there, where you had the players really coming into the peak of their powers right now. Now, you're a coach looking at that and seeing the amount of first rounders that are quality players that have got that potential and upside coming to the peak of their powers at this point in time.
Yeah.
It's not a hard, the job of the players wasn't hard. It was the culture that was always going to be the hard thing to change.
That's right.
As a talent base.
But half the problem is that the club's administration and board were never prepared to admit that they had a problem, that they had a cultural issue. That in any way, shape or form, the problem lay with them. And what they were doing or not doing that were contributing to that poor culture that existed at the club. So, that's half the battle, getting people to admit that they are part of the problem.
Sacking people,
Yeah, just we'll sack another coach, we'll sack another CEO, whatever it might be, and they can take the fall.
And then
it's never us.
Yeah.
Mind you, we did a few things last year which created half of the board to turn over. So some people fell on their sword.
Well, it's the board turned over, but it's factions. But we won't talk about that.
Yeah, that's another discussion for another day.
Speaking of off-field stuff, so you had your little junket to Perth, and you do look tanned and refreshed.
Tanned, mate. I didn't get a tan, I can tell you. It was nice weather in the first couple of days I was there, but let me tell you, it all turned pretty nasty on Saturday. It was raining cats and dogs all day Saturday.
Oh,
and
anyway.
and even the day of the game, when I parked the car, which I had to park, I didn't realise you couldn't park at the ground unless you had a special pass. Ended up having to park near Crown Casino, which is like 20 minutes walk away. In that 20 minutes between the Crown car park and Optus Stadium, I got absolutely drenched. But anyway, cleared up, and there was even some sun while the game was on. So, the rain kept away, which was good.
So anyway, you look a little bit tan then.
I don't know about that.
Maybe it's a lot. So
probably
you were hosting the WA supporter group.
WA
function.
Blues. Yep.
Yeah,
pre-match function. Yep.
And it was good to see. Well, it's been 3 years now since anyone other than a club official that's not a WA resident and not going to go into that Democratic People's Republic of WA stuff, but essentially that's what.
No, that's all right. Daniel Andrews and Mark McGowan are trying to compete with each other to see who can be the most tyrannical dictator than the other. Go on.
Anyway, I didn't want to bring that up. I shouldn't have. Anyway, so Victorians travelled over as well. Some of them made a bit of a trip of it as well, and good to see. What was the supporter groups? What was the vibe like? Because it's been a while since there's been many of those interstate supporter group functions. We're only starting to get back into them this year. What was the vibe like? I know WA is probably one of our strongest supporter groups. How's it going? Tell me about the back end of how those groups are running and how it's all going.
Well, look, WA are fortunate enough to have a very healthy supporter base. They have a lot of Carlton supporters over there, and I think traditionally that's because of Western Australians who have come over to Victoria to play football, and a lot of the better ones went to Carlton, such as Mike Fitzpatrick and Sid Jackson originally back in the late 60s, but even through the 70s through Mike Fitzpatrick, Kenny Hunter in the early 80s, and Peter Bosustow and Alan Montgomery and John Dorotich, Wayne Blackwell, Brad Shine, Steve DeRuy. And in the 90s, we had players like Matt Clappe and Earl Spalding come across from other clubs. And, of course, in the 2000s, we've had a host of others like, Dennis Armfield and David Allard and champions like Kane Lucas. I was being a bit facetious there. I think it's a very healthy supporter base over there. And when they have a function prior to a match, it's very well supported. I feel that every time I go there, I'm happy to help them out whenever they ask me to host a function or conduct an auction or what have you. It's always a great atmosphere there, and they put on a great show. And they've got some real dedicated people in their committee who even run a radio show every Saturday morning on a community station called Sport FM 91.3. So if you ever have the inkling to listen to some footy on the radio, talking about Carlton for an hour every Saturday morning, I think it's 8 a.m. Perth time. So it'll be 10 o'clock Melbourne time during the season. That's the show, Breakfast with the Blues, and Chris Brownie and Melanie Hall and Craig Bradford and Jesse Goldsworthy. They're all there as part of that show every Saturday morning. They even have David Rees-Jones come on for about 15 minutes every week and give us his take on the previous game and what he thinks might happen in the upcoming game. So whether we've played a match already on a Thursday night or a Friday night, or whether we're about to play one on a Saturday or a Saturday night or a Sunday, that show happens at the same time every week, 8 o'clock WA time, Sport FM 91.3. So just a little plug and a shout out to all of those guys.
Yeah, you can get on the internet.
So I don't know if I've answered your question, but yeah, certainly very healthy support. We put up a lot of items for auction yesterday, and it was fantastic results achieved. They really have got some passionate people there that are happy to put hand in pocket for signed memorabilia or whatever it is you put up for auction, really.
Yeah, that's great. And so
they even get past players turning up. Like yesterday, we had Ross Ditchburn, former 1982 Premiership player, and Brad Shine was there, and Peter Bosustow came into the room, and of course Peter's had a lot of health issues of late, but we auctioned off a couple of things for him that helped put some money in his pocket.
Who could forget Ross Ditchburn's? Was it one season with us in '82? I think it was. Was it one? Yeah. Well,
he kicked 12 goals in one game against St Kilda at Waverley. In fact, it was one of the quiz questions that I came up with, because I ran a quiz and came up with about 12 different questions, and we gave a prize to the winner. But Ross Ditchburn, I think it was something like which Carlton Western Australian player kicked 12 goals in a game against St Kilda at Waverley back in 1982. Was it Warren Ralph or was it Ross Ditchburn? Now, of course, Warren Ralph didn't even come to Carlton until about 1984, I think.
Yeah, he was a bit.
So Ross Ditchburn it was. Yeah. And in fact, Ross and his wife and his daughter sat behind me yesterday in the row right behind me when we were watching the game. So fantastic guy, and he'll be back across here in Melbourne for the Spirit of Carlton 1982 reunion.
Yeah.
I think they're having a function on the 11th of August.
Yeah, absolutely. And Brian McMahon makes...
Yes, hi, Brian. Great man, Brian. WA players instrumental in our 80s premierships. Exactly. Yeah. A lot of them. Hunter, Bosustow, Ditchburn, Dorotich a bit later
Blackwell.
in '87. Blackwell unfortunately didn't
Oh,
play
no,
in
he
any
missed
premierships.
he played in 86, the losing
He
one.
missed out on '87 through injury,
Yeah.
which was sad because I really think he deserved to be part of that. But and we had a couple in the '95 team in Spalding and Clappe.
Yeah, and so those supporter groups, they're essentially self-governing, self-funded. How do they work?
Well, they're meant to be, and traditionally they have been. They've got. I guess they do have their own committee, which I guess whether they vote on that committee or whether they just have people that come on and volunteer to come on, and others decide to eventually step off, etc. I'm not sure how they elect people as such, but I know that the club has, like they have with many other groups, including coterie groups, taken a lot more control over what these groups do and how they do it. And especially when it comes to pre-match functions, they dictate, listen, we're going to be here at such and such a time. Shane O'Sullivan will be coming down and he'll be bringing a coach or a player or both, or an official.
Do they censor the questions? So the club say, here are the people we're going to give you, and you're only allowed to ask them A, B, and C questions?
See, Shane does the questions himself. So Shane comes in and then says, hi, everyone. So I've introduced Shane. God. And then Shane comes up on stage and he'll give Ashley Hansen. So this is what happened yesterday. Ashley Hansen, our assistant coach, who used to play, of course, for West Coast and played in a premiership for West Coast in 2006.
His dad was Clark Hansen, the bowler.
Clark Hansen, yes, the former broadcaster on ABC for many years, right. Clark.
Yeah.
Now, Ashley came along and Shane asked him a whole range of pre-prepared questions, and I'm sure Ashley knew exactly what was going to be asked. And they, went into his playing career and then what happened after he finished playing and what he's doing as a coach and, how he's helping the team and all that sort of thing. And anyway, one of the things that I always listen for is the noise levels in the room. And if they start to rise and rise and rise and rise like they did during that interview, you know that you've lost the crowd.
Yeah.
And, unfortunately, I don't know if it was because of a lack of interest in what Ashley Hansen had to say or whether it was how the interview was conducted, because it was, to me, those sorts of interviews are very sterile and clinical.
So back in the old days,
there's nothing spontaneous and entertaining about them. Do you know what I mean?
I know you.
It's informative, but it's not what I'd call entertainment.
Yeah. So I know you're not going to say this yourself. I'll say it for you.
Yeah.
So back in the old days, it was essentially spontaneous. The MC would just simply ask questions.
You'd have someone like Peter Meehan, who used to be a radio man on 3KZ back in those days. He'd be asking questions that weren't provided beforehand. He'd just ask them off the cuff. Yeah. Or a Drew Morfitt or a Craig Willis or someone like that. Yeah.
So why are the clubs scared of
Jim Wilson?
Why is this now communist China, literally, with the media, China state media? Why is
everything is very? It seems to me that everything that this club does now is orchestrated, pre-planned, pre-rehearsed, pre-approved. It's everything's got to be basically pre-approved. Otherwise, it's vetoed. So, why? I think they're paranoid about perception rather than delivering a reality.
So,
and it's all about making sure that all the messaging and whatever is said is in line with, what perceptions they want to create in the minds of the supporter.
I did speak to some people that were there, and apparently the president was in the room, and a couple of them.
He did pop in, yes, yeah. But he popped in after Brian Cook had already been interviewed. Well, actually, he wasn't interviewed. Brian Cook pretty much got up there and just started to speak.
Yeah.
And that's where he's a real pro.
Yeah.
And he was good to listen to, I've got to say.
Yeah.
And I don't think he's necessarily the type to fall in line with this pre-prepared question and answer thing. He'd rather just, he'd rather just say it as it is. And
he knows his stuff though. So he can do
but
that.
the media department hasn't really modified itself under Brian's watch. I don't think Brian's really taken any time to assess all of that and change any of it yet.
Yeah.
Whether any of it does get changed or not, I don't know, because it seems to me that the media side of things is more governed by certain board members than it is by the CEO.
Absolutely. So a couple of people bumped into the president as an example, and I'm sorry to say this, but they sort of basically got fresh air right now.
Well, I did offer Luke Sayers the opportunity to come up on stage and to even just to say hello and to greet the supporters and say thanks for your support and whatever, just a hello and a thank you. But he declined. He declined the offer. He said, no, that's all right. Brian's already been here and spoken. I don't need to speak.
Yeah.
Which I found that a bit disappointing, because I think even if you're going to say pretty much the same sort of thing as what Brian has said, so what? You're the president, and your people need to hear from you.
Absolutely.
And what the response he gave me was almost a complete replica of the sort of response that Mark Lejudice had given the same supporter group 3 years earlier in 2019, when the function was held at the Empire, which was a different place.
Yeah.
Yesterday's function was at the Cam Field, which is like 100 metres from the ground.
Yeah.
The Empire is a couple of kilometres away, and we had a big function that day, and Mark Lejudice appeared, but he didn't want to talk.
So they kept the Word document on file on the computer and just changed the dates and names.
I don't
know. Look,
at the end of the day, both presidents had the opportunity to talk and say hello and to say thanks and say whatever they wanted to say without necessarily taking questions. But both of them declined the opportunity, which I think a few people in that room took as a bit of a slap in the face.
Yeah, because the people I spoke to said essentially,
like, we're not important enough for you to talk to.
Yeah, and the feel was that that when they needed, they'd had programs and maybe had like the president on their podcast or whatever shows they'd had, without giving names away or anything like that. And then essentially the president sort of didn't remember who they were or anything like that. So
yeah. Look, I saw a couple of people on the WA supporters group committee greeting Luke Sayers and saying, remember me, I'm such and such, and I interviewed you on my radio show or whatever. And it was like, oh, yeah. But that was it. And I don't know really why Luke bothered to come. If he wasn't going to talk, I don't know why he bothered to go in the room, because
I know he's not Stephen.
He was there for 5 minutes and then gone.
I know he's not Stephen Kernahan. I know he never is going to be. But when you look at a president, and I understand there's different elements that one president brings to a table versus another, but you've got to be able to transcend all cross sections of the supporter base, don't you?
Yeah.
And I remember, Sticks potentially maybe not ruthless enough. Could be said, maybe. Some people would say that, but as an actual people's person, to be able to talk to all levels of stakeholder, whether it's your silver member, three game silver member, or your kid, right to your senior stakeholder or your 50-year member, he would be able to just communicate with all of them and remember who they were, like really passionate about the club.
No question about that. I think there are certain people that don't see it as important to mix with every level of member.
Yep.
And so certain people make it their business to associate with every level of member. And they'd rather be if you like, a leader of the people in that sense, because they do talk to them at every function, and whether you're a 3-game member or high-flying executive at a major corporation. They don't care. They just talk to anybody. And that's more like your Stephen Kernahan. Obviously, having seen us win a number of games and we're on the positive side of the ledger and we look like playing finals, I think you can get away with a lot more if you're going to behave the way I saw our president behave yesterday. You'll probably get away with it. But people don't forget. They do take notice of these things. I think Luke Sayers would be well advised to, if he gets the opportunity to go to a supporter group like that, take 2 minutes, 1 minute even, just to say hello, to say thanks so much for your support. It's fantastic to see you all here. The boys are raring to go. Let's hope we can beat the Eagles and have a decent win. Thanks again for your support. Really means a lot. Hope to see you all in Melbourne if you get a chance, etc., etc. And, just rustle up the crowd and give them something to cheer for. And, like the old days of John Elliott, he would have got up there and said, let's all sing the club song, Everyone be upstanding and let's stand on the chairs and, all that sort of thing. Well, that got everyone roused up. So if you want to be a president of the people, you've got to do things like that, not just appeal to your corporate mates at president's functions.
Yeah, I agree. It's a bit disappointing, nonetheless.
Well, I'm just telling you as I see it. I'm saying the same thing to anyone who's watching here tonight. But I think a few people were left a bit, raised a few eyebrows that the president
because you only
came in but didn't feel compelled to talk to anybody.
They only play once or twice a year if you're lucky.
Well, we had a game against Fremantle earlier this year there. So this is one of those years where we played twice in WA, but a lot of the time it's only once. And
so that's their grand final for that support group.
Well, this is the game. These are the games that Carlton supporters over there really look forward to.
Their calendar.
I asked Ross Ditchburn. He said the only time I come to the football is when Carlton's playing here.
The calendar, it would have months in advance when that fixture comes out. Right, we're not doing anything around this weekend.
Well, these days with that rolling fixture, and they don't tell you until about a month before, they've got to try and plan it. Hopefully the AFL, I think they've made a decision, they were saying during the week for next year, that they're not going to have a floating fixture anymore. We'll see.
Well, if you're not going to do that, at least play teams 1 to 17 in a row. No,
it doesn't work out that way, unfortunately, because of a lot of other things to do with, regular games that are fixed around, Easter or Anzac Day or, Dreamtime at the G's always played on a certain weekend and all that sort of thing. So they'd like to, I'm sure, but I don't think it works out that way. So sometimes you're playing, for example, we've played Richmond twice already, but we haven't played Brisbane once yet. We haven't played Melbourne once yet. We haven't played Geelong once yet. It's one of those things where the way the fixtures compiled, you're sometimes not going to play a team once up until the second last round of the year, like us this year. We're not going to play Melbourne until round 22.
Brisbane round 20, I think it is it?
Yeah. All righty. Well, we've spoken about that enough.
3-2-1s, I think. That's all. That's it. 3-2-1s were the only thing.
I was just going to say, what are your votes for the game that was played yesterday?
I'm going, and this is really simplistic. Walsh 1, Mackay 2, Curnow 3. I think with the two bags of goals that they both kicked, essentially they beat West Coast's score between them. The service was good, but they worked beautifully in tandem. So I've just got to give the two forwards the 2 and the 3 votes respectively.
I'm 100% with you. And I thought, well, they've both kicked 5 goals, 3, but I think Charlie kicked the more crucial ones at times in the match where it really mattered. Mackay got a couple of late ones in that last quarter, etc. And I think that's what sort of elevated Charlie to get the 3 votes. So I've gone Charlie Curnow 3, Harry Mackay too. The two pillars there, they were the two most important players on the ground for mine. Now, the of course, someone's got to kick it to them, but the midfield was very much an even midfield, an even spread of workload. That's a good sign too. You know, whether it was Kennedy, whether it was Chera, whether it was Hewitt, Walsh, or Cripps, and even other players like Fisher rotating sometimes through there. You know, they all had their even spread of possessions. I don't think anyone got more than 28 possessions. So, and there was plenty of others on 27 and 26 and 25 and 24. So, the midfielder I put in for one vote was actually. Did you say Walsh?
Yes.
Funnily enough, so did I.
Oh, we agree for a change.
So we're both exactly the same. 3, 2, and 1. Kerno, Harry Mackay, and Walsh. Nice to
I'll
be on the same terms as you, hey?
I'll have to watch the replay again. Maybe I missed something. I might see that to change. Yeah.
Now, next week, we have a big match against Geelong, 7:25 at the MCG. We won't go into an analysis now of who we think is going to win and why and all that sort of thing, but we'll just get a quick tip from you. What do you think?
We're a chance because Stewart's not playing, but they were very, very good last week on
against Melbourne.
Albeit at home, I know, but it was still a night game.
Yeah.
They were and had multiple options going forward too. It wasn't just the tools. You shouldn't tip against your own team, but I think they might just shade us, but it is going to be a very good game.
They might just shade us. So what are you saying? Geelong by 1 goal, 2 goals? How many goals?
Yeah. 2 goals, yeah.
2 goals.
I'm being realistic. I'm not trying to be emotional here.
No, I know that. I think the fact that it's on the MCG suits us.
Yep.
More than them. I think the fact that it's our home game with our home crowd will help us rather than them. The fact that it's a night game, not sure who that suits. But I still think we're looking like a team that's still got some work to do and some passengers in it. I don't think everyone's pulling their weight at the same time, to the same extent. I still reckon there'll be a couple of changes to our team, even though we won by 10 goals. I still think there's potential of at least a change or two. I don't think everyone was pulling their weight in the West Coast game. So, yeah, I think they're a more settled side. I agree with you that Stewart is a huge loss for them, but they've still managed to win quite comprehensively against Melbourne.
Absolutely.
I'd love to see Carlton win, don't get me wrong, but I think all things equal, I think Geelong's going to win by 5 goals.
Yeah, well, it could be close, though. I think it's going to be
I hope I'm wrong.
game.
I really hope I'm wrong. I want to be wrong, but if I'm going to apply logic to it, and often logic doesn't end up being reality, but I think Geelong by 5. I actually think Geelong now are looking more like a premier than any other team. I think they're looking more like the real deal than what Melbourne is, than what Brisbane is, what Fremantle is. Yeah.
More even, yeah.
Yeah. I think Geelong is maybe just this year. I know Chris Scott's been knocking on the door for a decade now. He's never missed on Has he actually missed out on a final series during the last 10 years?
Once, I think.
Once.
Yeah.
So, you know, they're such a consistent team and they're just constantly tinkering with that side to get the proper mix of players to actually be a premiership team. And I reckon this might be the last hurrah for players like Dangerfield and Selwood and guys like that. And it almost has this Carlton of 1995 feel about it, that team. And the ageing stars might just pull it off this year.
Yeah, and also he's been unlucky because they've had the years Geelong have been up there. They've had sides that have had extraordinary years.
Yeah.
So,
Well, anyway, we hope we're wrong, but that's what we think. All right. So you say Geelong by 2 goals. I say Geelong by 5. We'll see how it pans out. I hope I hope we can certainly make a big contest out of it. That's for sure. We're fifth on the ladder. We're well entrenched in the 8. I don't think we'll miss out on finals now. We only need to win another couple of games out of the last. What is it? How many more to go? I think there's 6 more to go.
Yeah.
So if we win 2 out of 6, we'll definitely play in the finals. Question is how high up. If we can knock over Geelong, that will really set us up for a top 4 position.
Yep.
But if we lose to Geelong, I think we'd just lose a bit of touch. Unless teams like Brisbane or Fremantle or Melbourne have one big fall from grace, I can't see us making top 4 if we lose to Geelong. But you never know. All right, Stevie, good to see you, mate. Good to talk to you. Thank you to everyone who contributed on the show today. Thanks very much for your comments and questions. We hope you've enjoyed it. We will be back next Monday night. It's another week where we're not going to be broadcasting on the Sunday. You can blame me for that. I won't be available. But next Monday night at 8 o'clock, you can tune in right here on In the Blue Corner, and we'll have another show that summarises the week that Carlton played, the week that was, and try and look forward to the week that will be. All righty. Let us know what you think on our Facebook page if you enjoy the show. If you didn't enjoy the show, just keep your mouth shut. Don't tell them.
No. We don't censor comments.
I'm only joking. All righty. Until next time, everyone, it's time to say one last thing. Go Blues. Cheers.